Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining me for another episode of Talking Each Other Home. I am your host, Dani, and on the podcast today, we have Stephen Fielding joining us. I met him through Fit for Service, and now we finally had the chance to collaborate and connect over a podcast conversation. And it was so cool and so interesting. And just to give you a little snippet about what we talked about partnerships and transitioning from one that's not working to one that is, and what that process kind of looks like. And also the difference between masculine and feminine energies, the difference between doing and being. And then also that flowed right into manifesting and our processes for manifesting, and just some little stories about what we've been able to create with visioning and just making little sketches on pieces of paper. So it was very kind of magical. And then we went into intentional jewelry making. So him and his partner, Deb, they make these amazing pieces of jewelry. And he gave us a little bit of insight on how some of the malas that he made actually ended up being really healing and life-saving and important for people. And we talked a little bit about crystals and raising the vibration and the energy that they like to put in their jewelry, and how the intention is elevation and to increase and raise the vibration. And I just thought that was so beautiful and intentional. And we also, at the end, talked a little bit about the new earth and what we could look forward to creating, and maybe what we could create in our own lives with creativity and collaboration and giving and volunteering our time and efforts, and just knowing that and trusting that we will be taken care of. And I love that, because that's some of the principles that I live by. And then we ended it with talking a little bit about money relationships and inner child work, and going back into our childhood and into the ancestry and into the genetic things that make us who we are today. And so it was really cool to talk about allowing ourselves more of ourselves. And I think that's something that we don't do enough, is allow ourselves to be more of ourselves. And so I said, Stephen, how do we do that? And he said, going back and retrieving. So going back into our childhood and our lineage and our ancestry. And so going back and looking at that to make us who we are today, and also getting in really uncomfortable situations. And after doing cold plungings and being an entrepreneur and doing some of these uncomfortable shadow work, what I can speak to about being uncomfortable is that is a total perfect breeding ground for becoming more of yourself. And I think that's why people love the saying, keep getting comfortable, getting uncomfortable, is because when you get in those situations, you learn more about yourself, you become more of who you are and who you were created to be. And so it was really awesome to talk about allowing yourself more of yourself and your truth, and not suppressing, and just becoming more authentically ourselves. And so I hope you guys enjoy this podcast. I so enjoyed it. I could have asked him questions all day and just dug into all of his experience and wisdom. And hopefully one day we'll get to collaborate together and do retreats together, maybe like this cool masculine, feminine energy, something, I don't know. But anyway, thank you guys for joining for another episode. Thank you, Stephen, again. And I hope you guys enjoy the show. And really quick, just a quick note from our sponsors, Conscious Champion. I love talking about Conscious Champion, you guys. So I kind of get excited every time I get to talk about the sponsors of this show, because that is my business and it allows me to do fun things like podcasting. And there was a time in my life where I did not like to talk about my sponsors other than Fit Hustle. There was a time where it just felt really icky and not in alignment. But this, I can't wait for the world to find out about Conscious Champion, because it has been a passion project. I get so excited to show up for the calls every week and talk to all the people and be so connected. And now in June, the retreat is planned. The information went out and it is happening, you guys. I am hosting my very first Conscious Champion retreat. It's called Spirit Walk. It's going to be in Colorado. And I am so excited to do this transformational work with people in person. And it's going to be adventure mixed with spirit. So we're going to do some adventure stuff, white water rafting and zip lining. We're going to have a ceremonial hike in hot springs and do a static dance under the light of the full moon. And oh my goodness. So, yeah, so I am very excited to talk about the sponsors, because it is in absolute alignment with me. And yes, if you guys have any questions about Conscious Champion and what I do and what it's about and how can you be involved, please let me know. I will have probably a little mini courses going on throughout the summer. So if you have any interest at all, please contact me on Instagram, send me a DM, or you can email me at Dani@DaniReardon.com. And I will be so happy to set up a call with you and just let you know how maybe we can connect and work together. Okay. That's enough for me for now about Conscious Champion. I could go on over. I should probably just do a whole podcast about Conscious Champion if I'm being truthfully honest. Actually, maybe I will. Okay. But until that happens, let's get on to the podcast with Stephen. And I hope you guys enjoy the show. Stephen, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited and honored to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's been something I've been anticipating for a little while. It's nice to connect, and we haven't seen each other for a little bit since the last summit, so it's lovely to just have some time with Tribe.
Yeah, definitely. I've been anticipating this as well, and I am so excited for some of the stuff that we're going to talk to today, and I really feel like it's going to serve everybody who listens to it, because it seems like the common thread is about raising the vibration, whether we do it individually or collectively, consciously or unconsciously. It seems like that is the goal here, whether it be through jewelry or men's circles or anything else that you're into. And so just a small little background just before, just so people can get like introduced to you and what you've done and what you do. And then we'll get into present day.
So I'll wrap up 53 years into 30 seconds. Okay. Well, a lot of what you would get to, if you were to get to know me, you would pick up on the fact that I'm not originally from the US. So I was born and raised in the UK. I'm the oldest of 3 kids, private school educated, have done, the usual, path from high school to university to the professional career, and have had 2 marriages, now 2 kids with their mom, and exited that a couple of years ago. And I started my journey coming out of my first marriage, where I did some transpersonal transformational work, and just started working on myself 20 years ago, and then kind of took a respite from that when I jumped into wanting to go down the family, establishing a family, being a husband, being a father, and that had some difficulties in terms of continuing to work on myself in that context. So that was a part of the reason to exit. The growth paths weren't aligned, and so now, a couple of years ago, we met through Fit for Service and all the work that gets done there. And it was a revisiting or introduction to just all of that transformational work, that personal work, the inner work that we do. And coming out of my first experience of that back in the 2001, 2000 timeframe, I jumped into leading men's circles in the Bay Area, did a bunch of retreat weekends, became involved with production teams, and then worked my way up through the organization that I was connected to being a course supervisor and working closely with the leadership there to execute these weekends that gave, literally our phrase was, people would get their life out of those weekends, because it was a unique context to jump into that we didn't really spend time, really putting ourselves in a place of vulnerability in front of a room, in front of your community, and saying, how am I showing up? Tell me, trying to figure out life from inside the fishbowl of your own life, trying to take a look at the back of your eye and assess how things are going. It takes an act of vulnerability and courage to say, okay, hall of mirrors, reflect back to me, what you are seeing, how you are experiencing me in this moment. So that's a big part of what folks get out of their involvement with Fit for Service, let alone just the ceremonial and initiatory, rites of passage and all the fun things that happen with like the games of elements and all those things that we did down in Austin last year, which was super fun, and putting yourselves in those uncomfortable positions you get something out of it. And so that's where I'm at right now, is revisiting and reconnecting to my commitment to mental healing, and being of service to helping guys get through some of the wounds that they have picked up through life. As I mentioned, 53 years of life and 2 marriages and 2 kids. I might have a perspective or 2 to share, and I'll get into that in a minute, but I'll leave it like that. So how's that as a summation?
That's perfect.
Oh,
I
good.
love it. It seems like it's circled back to inner work, and that's been your driving force and maybe your vision and the most important thing to you for the last couple years, and even causing you to sort of uncouple from one relationship and then, keep going on your path. So
Yep.
it's really interesting and it's inspiring. And I hear a lot of people too sometimes say, well, I'm evolving. What if the person that I'm with doesn't want to evolve with me? And at like one point, do you make the decision, have the talk? If they come, that's great. If they don't, that's fine. That's their way. So it's interesting that you've been through that and now you're on the other side, and it seems like you're very, very happy with your life and with your trajectory. So congratulations. But could you also talk a little bit about that process?
The exiting one and into a new phase of life. Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I didn't handle it all that gracefully. My personal path I was in, let me back up, the choice to choose the relationship, every time something presents itself as a challenge, and you choose to either push down like how you want to be, seen or expressed, and you put it to the side and you compromise, like, okay, maybe that's not important. I'm going to choose the relationship over my own personal expression and my authenticity. And having the better part of 20 years of that, then you end up doing some pretty, in my experience and my path, I ended up doing a pretty dramatic thing in terms of having an affair and thinking that this was the path that I wanted to go on, and that I deserve the love that this other woman was giving me, and that was the context that I wanted to live my life in. And I'm done with this, and and I will figure out how to be present for my boys. I have 2 sons down the road. So it was a pretty dramatic kerfuffle, and it wasn't as conscious uncoupling as it could have been, and so that's left some rifts, and we're working through that. But it is, in my experience, particularly for men, is that when you make those compromises from the beginning, it just ends up being a bigger and bigger and bigger thing, and then you end up having resentment, and then you're hiding how you really feel, and then you start making decisions based on all that hurt. And if I were to do it all over again, this is about allowing yourself. We talked about this concept that my mentor, Jerry Candelaria, shared with me before he died. And he just encouraged me. That was his prayer for me, was that I was just unabashedly me and allow myself completely. And I'm still learning exactly what that means, but it's a guidepost which I look to frequently. Am I actually allowing myself in this moment, and having the courage just to say what's there, and not live at effect of how my partner may react to it. This reminds me of a book that a very pivotal book, which I recommend to all my men's connections. Invariably, this book comes up in almost every first few conversations with a guy I'm getting to know, and that's Dr. Robert Glover's book by the name of No More Mr. Nice Guy. And there are some patterns in there, and through that whole book and the exercises, I was just nodding and like, holy shit, this is what I've been doing, and it's not so nice. It's you want to have everything flat in terms of no ripples on the lake. You want it to be calm, and you want to have access to your woman in terms of affection, but then you're living at effect of keeping the lake calm, and not being confident enough in like, okay, so she's pissed right now, so, and she's not available to me right now. That's okay. It'll resolve itself with conversation and communication. So, um, yeah, I mean, you look at like, why was I falling into those patterns? I mean, you look back and assess and start to forensically like where did that pattern and that talk track get laid down? Well, most likely at boarding school in England, where I wanted to be part of the crew. I wanted to be, one of the mates, and was in and out of favor with the core group of friends, and I would be of service to them, and I would do things on their behalf, and they would be nice to me, and then they would bully me, So it was that up and down, um, of emotions that I wanted to eliminate from my experience and just have everything being hunky-dory all the time. So, which is not reality. So it's but it's a pattern that sort of led into other things coming to bear in life. But once you can sort of identify the root and you can pull it out and address it, yeah, I mean, it doesn't get easier. It just, you get to acknowledge it, and either you are about it and you handle it, or you don't. But it's always every time is an opportunity.
Yes, an opportunity. An opportunity for what? Growth, learning,
Well,
consciousness.
you can choose to have the conversation. You can choose to have the courage. Another book that I'm going to mention, the king archetype, right? So archetypes and understanding one's psyche, the book by Robert Moore, King, Warrior, Magician, Lover, another standard of my books of must reads for men. And when you look at those archetypes and the light and dark side of those, the light and the shadow version of those archetypes, and then you have the mature and immature version of those, you do the math, you start multiplying that matrix out, and you have a lot of stuff going on in here. So if you can't have a framework by which, like, okay, am I being like my highest self in this moment? Am I showing up in a mature way? Am I handling, can I look at my kingdom and put things back in order? Do I have the capacity not to look away, not to like, brush it underneath the rug and like, oh, it'll go away, I'll just ignore that? And having the courage to clean it up, to clean the mess up, whether you created it or not. So yeah, that's a big part of the journey too for men, I think.
And as you're talking, I'm thinking, who better to lead a men's circle? I mean, you've been doing this work for a while, and like the thing I learned last year was the healing I do on me is the healing I do on them, the people that I'm working with. And it seems like you've been really digging into going even all the way back to when you were in grade school to like, why are these things happening? So, and even the work that you've done coming to where you are now with your relationships and stuff, it's just so interesting and empowering when I hear you speak about it, because you're also teaching and you're helping others walk their path in a really conscious, supported way. And I just want to commend you for that, because more men need men like you.
Mm,
So thank you for doing that.
yeah, I mean, it's been the biggest hurdle that I've had to get not necessarily comfortable with, but acknowledge and move beyond, is whether I felt like I didn't have anything to say. I felt guilty about the privilege from which I came from. My father and mother stayed together for 54 years. She passed last September, and he's still around, and he's been a beautiful example of how to be head of household and provider and a protector. And he's a surgeon by trade, so he wasn't around a whole lot when I was a kid, but he provided every opportunity. As I mentioned, private school background. I didn't leave college with debt underneath my balance sheet. He gave me lots of opportunities to do activities like learn how to scuba dive when I was 14 years old, or go on spring break, or everything was provided, right? And the guilt that I sometimes feel in the moment of like, who am I to be telling, like, I didn't come from a background of hardship. I didn't come from a background where parents were alcoholics or, addicted to drugs or abusive, or all the things that we hear in going on in people's backgrounds. But what I do have is love. I had, my connection with my dad, and less so with my grandfather. On my father's side, but my mother's side, my grandfather was very loving and accessible, and he, was a great example of a man in command of his world. I mean, and every man has his faults and his things to work on and things he didn't show up so great for. But overall, when I leave a men's weekend, there, I don't know how many hugs there have been, but it's that fatherly presence where I can pass that that concern and that warmth on, and that acceptance, and leave younger men feeling like, you got it, kid. I'm here for you, and you can do it, and just be that for them in any one moment. So that's been a revelation for me over the past few years, is like owning that presence inside a group where a lot of men are like in their late 20s or 30s, and I'm into, as I mentioned, into my 50s, and 2 marriages and a couple kids. And okay, well, what do I want to tell my 27-year-old self again? Like, how would I redo it? And that's my opportunity to sort of lay some nuggets of wisdom on them, and hopefully they are revealing, or deliver some clarity, and unlock some things for them. But yeah, it's a privilege and an honor to be in those spaces with them, and just to show up as a guy who can hold space and love them for however they show up.
Just showing up in your being, as all of yourself. And something we talked about, so something has been floating around my space, and even with my mastermind group, is talking about the difference between masculine and feminine energies, and not male female, but more so like the empowered or disempowered qualities of masculine, feminine, and the being versus doing. And so it sounds like when you're in these men's circles, you're almost like in all of your being, and you're very in a flow state and an allowing state. Can you talk a little bit about being and doing and the masculine, feminine things?
For sure. Well, I mean, this gets down into a bit of anatomy as well, right? So the concept the precepts are receiving and penetration, right? So as a man, I'm trying not to project sort of meant to be, you're in the world, you're meant to be this, but in general, male, masculine, whole energy is a constructive, loving, pressing forward and penetrating the veil, the challenge, doing the hard thing, being a contribution to your community, understanding that your life is not necessarily about you, it's about contribution. And yeah, things are going to be hard sometimes, but then you still need to do it, and having the courage to step forward and carry that forward. And from a feminine perspective, the work that in my personal relationship with Deb, it's like, how do I, when one shows up authentically and releases the responsibility of a woman to also have to press forward in the world, in the modern world, and she can step back and be in more of a receptive, channeling space where she gets to surrender and open and be receptive to how you show up. But you've got to be coming from your heart. As a man, we did a very interesting exercise with Zaya down in Costa Rica, where she asked us to focus on our sort of primal bestiality, more of a not heart-centered, but groin-centered, you want that in front of you, rather, in terms of you're claiming that in front of you from a purely lustful, bestial, animalistic way, but then she also gave us the opportunity to come from only the heart. But then when you combine the two in relationship and you're coming from that heart, animalistic claiming space, that's when you know the partner you're with, if you're lucky enough to have a woman who's willing to take the risk with you and completely surrender, and put you, it's a very big responsibility to be placed in that position, because you have to have your own shit together and not sort of transgress boundaries and all those kinds of things. So there's a lot of elements going on, but giving yourself practice, permission to practice, and you set up those contexts and like, okay, I'm gonna do my best to show up this way. Were you willing to work with me on this experience? And those can be actually some really fun and revealing experiences, even if it's within the context of a retreat weekend where you're doing that male female exercises, and after each one, if there's a clear like energetic cutting, like, okay, we're done with the exercise and now we're back to just being you and me and not connected. So acknowledging all of those energetics that are going on is part of the practice as well. So I'll leave it like that. Does that sort of reveal some things to talk about?
Definitely. Yeah. And we even talked about manifestation a little bit before too. So
yeah.
maybe we can jump into that, because it kind of goes in line with the being and the doing. So yeah, let's talk about manifestation.
Yeah, I'm a learner. I'm a student of that. And not necessarily an expert on that. So, I'll pass the baton back to you in terms of what you can share with me. But in my own experience, I have challenges, really, as Joe Dispenza, talks about in terms of living and experiencing in the moment what the feeling is of actually being in the place where you want to go, or having the life set up in such a way that it's just exactly how you envision it. So, there are lots of things. It's funny though. There are lots of things that I can point to that Deb helps me, acknowledge. Last year, this is just one example. Last year, we were thinking about, combining our households, and we were like, well, I was deep into the fit for service work, and she was really digging what I was bringing home in terms of knowledge and experience and the books we were reading, and we had some beautiful conversations. And then we started like, okay, playing around with the idea of combining households. Well, what kind of home would we have together? And what would we, offer out of the context of our home? Well, we wanted to have space to host community and bring people together and have deep conversations and potentially do men's weekends and retreats and breathwork and all the things. And we're like, well, we need an extra space other than the house. We might need a barn to go along with that. So, and I just happened to be talking to Chad Red Light Adorn, who's another FFS brother, and we were thinking about, well, how do we combine our resources and craft a men's retreat center and a property? And we had this idea of a barn being the center of the property. And I sketched out a barn with a extension on it, and it had a particular shape, and it had a sliding door on the front and some lines on it and whatnot. And now if you look at the barn on our property, and I look at the picture I drew in my book, I'm like, holy shit, it has a RV carport and a door that rolls out in front, and it opens up the whole barn, and it has the exact same roof line. And I'm like, holy shit, I drew that in my book. And then just thinking about and feeling into, well, what would that space look and feel like? And then here we are. We found the property. So there's something to it. I haven't perfected the practice yet, but Deb keeps on telling me, she goes, you manifest shit all the time. Like, stuff comes to you, you think about it, and then like all of a sudden, it comes through the ether, and you hear about it, or you go to some place and you experience what you thought you wanted and you desired. And so it's not as honed a skill as I imagine it could be eventually, but it's nascent. It's beginnings, baby steps.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you drew a little thing and then it came to life. I am such a big believer in especially visualization. I used to do it for bodybuilding a lot. And we talked a little bit about bodybuilding before. And I would like
Yep.
bring myself to tears thinking about me on the Olympia stage, giving my thank you speech, doing all the things right. And I was eventually on that stage. And I remember the moment where I was visualizing and I used to see myself doing this, front double bicep in front of the big red O. And it was like this thing that I had envisioned for years. And then the moment where I saw that picture at my very first Olympia was probably one of the most spiritual experiences of my life, because it was when a thought and a vision became a thing. And I was standing in my reality, like looking at the picture, the physical picture of it. And so the feeling about it is so important too, and how we feel good about it. And like I was saying, I would visualize and I would bring myself to tears, laying down, meditating in my closet. And it's interesting, there's a vibrational thing that needs to happen too. So it's like, it's good that we're visualizing and that we have vision boards and that we do these things, but then also we have to be a vibrational match in order to receive it. And there was something, so for me at the Olympia, I got second place instead of first, but there was things going on behind the scenes that I wasn't totally a vibrational match to get number one. I deserve number two because I was partying here and there. I was doing this and that. And so it wasn't total Miss Olympia status. And that was a hard lesson that is still hard for me to learn. But now I'm in this kind of in a more spiritual role and influence. So that was a big lesson that I needed to be where I am now. But so talking about manifestation, have you ever heard of Abraham Hicks or Abraham Esther Hicks?
Familiar name. Not sure if I could like name a book or a source or a quote.
They're all about manifesting, and she actually channels down Abraham, kind of like how people will channel is it Seth or something like that? So she channels Abraham, and her thing is ask, believe, receive. And I teach this in my course, and we ask for what we want. We have to be super clear, and we believe that we can achieve that. Like we believe we can get that house with the barn. We believe we can get to that stage. So there has to be an element of belief, because if you don't believe it, it's never going to happen. You can ask all you want, but if there's doubt, then it's not yours. And then the last part is about receiving and about being in a receiving mode and being open to have it. And like she says that you can't receive something good in a bad place. So there's a vibrational disconnect. So you have to be feeling good in order to get your good vision. So that's my little spiel on manifestation.
That that resonates for me. I don't know if you're familiar with Mary Margrave. Have you talked to Mary Margrave yet?
No.
She's another person who channels guidance from your guides. So she's a medium.
Is she an
so
FFS?
No, but she's connected to many members.
Okay.
Kyle Kingsbury, I mentioned her a few times. I took his recommendation to reach out. I am still doing homework for her, based on my one conversation for 2 hours. And again, this is more about the believing part. Not believing keeps me stagnant and keeps me feeling a little stuck. We're talking about before we got on the line here in terms of stuckness. In my present moment, I'm feeling a little in terms of lethargy and inertia to overcome. And I briefly mentioned my mom's passing last September, and I feel like there's some connection there that I'm not processing all the grief that's there to move through it, and I'm stuck there until I do so. So that's another the call out to just again be with it and to allow yourself and not to brush it under the rug. And that means feeling all the feels. And so that the believing and receiving, particularly the believing part, her tip to me was breath work was going to be the conduit through which things would unlock for me. So I literally, from that conversation, breathe and receive was the combination of that process. So again, another area for continued improvement. Do I do breath work as frequently as again, I'm projecting a should or woulda, coulda kind of thing. Probably there's room for improvement, for sure. So, yeah.
So there's work there. So there's work there to be done. So the stuckness isn't like a lost stuckness. It's almost just like, when is it time to do the work and release and really move through all of those emotions?
Yeah. I mean, it's Kyle Kingsbury talks about, there's so many beautiful and uh, in a library of books, right? So you acquire. I love books, the actual physical thing that you hold in your hand and reading them, and I rather have the thing in my head than read online or do an audio book. So I have a living library, as he likes to call it, of lots of books that I have the opportunity to read at some point, and they'll get read when they get read. So it's being okay with, like, okay, this is where I'm at right now, and not. There's a lot of work that goes on in terms of not shaming yourself and working through that. No, things are unfolding just as they're meant to be. It's there's no judgment around. I should be somewhere else. No, you need to be right here, right now, and you are where you're meant to be, and being okay with that in any one moment. So the trick is, like, acknowledging it. When you know better, you do better, and then you bring the practice in a little bit by little bit. So it's, you notice I'm drinking a little bit of extra water. I gotta be doing that a little bit more frequently. So I've been, over the past week, trying to imbibe a bit more H2O in my life. So every little bit helps, and so you can, even if I sit on my mat and don't do one sit up, but I just sit and meditate and, like, feel like, okay, I know a routine I want to be doing. At least you showed up, and as Godzi says, when you show up every day, then the muse knows where to find you, and when inspiration takes you, you'll flow with that. So those are the kinds of things the little sort of workarounds to not feeling the shame is, like, okay, but am I still showing up for myself? So
Seems like a big element of trust. And I think that's like, if you want to think about masculine, feminine, trust would be more feminine, and control would be more masculine, maybe trying to control everything. Especially like a whole grieving process and like moving through certain emotions. And like, sometimes we're supposed to be stuck. Sometimes we are supposed to be a hermit, and there's nothing wrong with that,
yeah.
because there will be a time where it's going to be all exterior work, where we will be out there doing the damn thing. And so I feel like the time as a hermit is necessary. It's one of my favorite times. I've been in that space a couple times. And now when I go in there, I kind of like it, because I know that there's going to come a time where I'm going to be very outputting tons of energy. So I kind of like the hermit vibe.
Yeah, you have quite a busy schedule, as I understand these days. So, yeah.
So breath work. Do you remember Autumn Aspen from Fit for Service?
Yep.
So we've been doing virtual breathwork sessions with her on my group, Conscious Champion. And we've done probably like 4 or 5. And she's going to come. I'm hosting my first retreat in June, and she's going to come be there with us in person live. Have you done a virtual one yet?
No, I've not. No.
Cool. Well, we might be planning another one for May. So if you have any space for May and you want to join us, I will definitely pass the invite your way.
I would love that. Yeah. I mean, we're planning to go down to Barbados at the end of May. And I have a weekend in Spokane to link up with Celeste. So to do a ceremony with her and Tara Bailey and folks out in Spokane. So we'll be jumping into her medicine over that weekend. But so those are my only 2 commitments. Otherwise, I'm just sort of plugging away at the jewelry business and work. I still, there's the balance of corporate work, being in that career mode, and then there's the stuff that feeds the soul, with all the personal development, transformational work, and the other things that we're interested in.
And jewelry, so intentional jewelry. Give me a little snippet on all this, the jewelry stuff, because I've seen some of your stuff on Instagram and it's great. Uh, yeah.
Thank
So
you.
tell me like where it came from, why did you start doing it, and what you hope to see come from it?
Well, it came from Deb. Deb is an amazing individual, and she's my partner. Basically, we collapsed our households, as I mentioned, and she's my wife. Basically, that's how I sort of hold her. We might not have a marriage license and all that kind of stuff and a document, but that's how we live together. That's how we hold each other. And when I was coming out of we came out of Tahoe. She came down to Tahoe for the summit there and was in the house with us as like house mom. It was funny because she has 10 she comes from a large Italian family, and she's like one of two females in the family. So she has 10 brothers, and so being in a house with about 12 guys was normal for her, and she loved being in the kitchen and orchestrating everything, and making food and manja. She was just in her element. So that was a really fun trip and adventure for us. And when we came back, she was like, she's very into naturopathic modalities and anything to connected with the raw earth and elements, and stones and crystals are part of that. So it's like, can I make some bracelets and hand them out as gifts and whatnot? And like, okay, I'll dive into that. It's creation, it's creativity, it's imagination, it's producing, it's meditative. I found, there was quite a bit of, thinking time that I could just, string some beads and in a design I came up with, and it was very sort of fulfilling from that perspective. And before you know it, I started like getting really intrigued. Like, well, what are the combinations? Like, we're not just going to do this one stone on, a rose quartz bracelet. Let's combine rose quartz with something else, and put some metals with it, and come up with a design. And this is where she has a fun story about her learning the word compersion. The word compersion, where compersion is when you teach somebody a skill and they express it better than you, in your opinion, and you have an appreciation for their higher level of skill. So in her experience of me doing this, she's like, fuck, you're better at this than me. And I'm like, I don't know what, I'm just feeling my way through it, right? And she started encouraging me, and so we created this company called Stone Witch Talisman. So it's the talisman, as you know, is an object that you would take into ceremony. It's a touchstone. It's a significant piece that you sit with on a regular basis. You meditate with it. You place intention with it. You live through the meaning of the stone and the qualities and the properties of the stone. And so I create these talismans for clients, and they often lead to amazing stories about synchronicities that happen in their world, messages that get downloaded, conversations that they feel like they would never have had without it being around their neck.
Can you tell me one? What's like one of your favorites?
I'm gonna tear up at this one. So one of our FFS brothers, Justin Wren, the big pygmy as he goes by in the UFC, he had one of his workout training partners committed suicide. So he left behind his family, his wife, and I think he had 2, maybe 3 kids. And his eldest son was going through a really rough period after his dad passed. And Justin gave a eulogy for his friend, for his training partner. And he was wearing a mala made out of howlite, and it had a ammonite pendant on the bottom of it. Mm. And I think I have an ammonite. Ammonite is one of these little creatures.
Cool, like little spiral thing.
Yeah, it's a nautilus. If you're familiar with the with the crustacean. So it's a shell. It's a fossilized um, nautilus, basically. So these little beings, lived millions of years ago. They're fossilized, and I put them on this particular mala, and the halite is very grounding and calming. And it was all halite and this one ammonite pendant on it. And I'd happened to send it to Justin, and then this incident happened with his training partner, and he wore it to the service, and he was talking about how he wore it and how it calmed him and grounded him, and everybody came up to him afterwards and touched it, and he ended up gifting that to his friend's eldest son. And then like a day or two later, they discovered that he had written his own suicide note, and he was contemplating leaving this world. And he said that the only reason that he didn't go through with it was the fact that he was wearing that mala. So I asked Justin flat out, I said, do you mean in your estimation, in your experience, you feel like that piece of jewelry saved his life? He goes, yeah, it did. So that's the power of a talisman. And I don't create them to help avoid situations like that, but I love the fact that there's so much power placed in an object that can help you get through or find a new way of being or a new higher level of vibration, and you use the stones to be able to cultivate that inside yourself, and you learn about the healing properties of those stones and the vibration and what they give off, and you literally, when I study them, I'll have a conversation with a client. I'll understand, get to know them a little bit, understand their intentions about why they feel called to have this item around, an item around their neck, or what they're trying to create in their life, and the vibration they're trying to cultivate in their life. And then I'll put the spell together. I'll put the combination together for them and send it off to them. And so, yeah, it comes in fits and starts. We have, we're going through a refresh of the website, so it's a little wonky, but yeah, it's a fun little creative outlet, and it has some positive intentions for sure.
I love it. I love it. I'm all about the crystals and the stones and the malas and the talismans, and like how they all have their own healing energy. And I guess for people who are listening that don't really know that much about crystals and stones, or they have questions about it, could you give us just like a little brief overview of why they're powerful, how to use them?
For sure. I'm still learning myself in terms of, but the way that I was teaching myself was, okay, we see colors. We see colors across a range of spectrum, and that is a result of the wavelength being reflected, the light being reflected out of an object. They are made up of various different types of minerals and elements, and if you were to put a current through them, they would have a wavelength to them that would resonate. You create resonance with them that have a particular wavelength. So when you talk about charging a crystal, you put it in the sunlight, or putting it in the moonlight of a full moon. You want that particular vibration to be absorbed by the stone. So if you have I love labradorite. The iridescence in that just gets me every time. And so
dragonfly wings.
Yeah. So it's a part of nature, right? And we've lost our connection in many ways to the natural world. And so it goes back to my fascination with the natural world. Jacques Cousteau was my hero, and I wanted to be an oceanographer by trade. And so that's what I went off to university to be, but I was too interested in playing rugby to do the science and to pay attention in class. So, but I still have an interest in the natural world. And then there's things like, I remember walking the beaches in Suffolk, England, on East Anglia, and my grandmother picking up agates and carnelians and other stones, and we would put them in the tumbler. And so it's also a personal connection to my gran. So, and that is also an experience that you can sort of recreate. And I have a lot of different varieties of agates in my collection of materials, and I'm like, well, why is that? I'm always drawn to carnelians, why is that? And I was like, oh shit, because I was walking the beach with my gran and she was always pointing these out to me. So it's, those objects carry meaning throughout one's life. And when you get to the place where you feel like, well, maybe I need a little extra help, or it just, you like the look of that particular stone. Some people love the look of the color of turquoise and all the different shades of blue green it comes in, and it helps you, just cultivate that better sense of self. And that's how I would leave it like that. I mean, you can look through all different sorts of resources and whatnot, and the energetic meaning of a stone, the spiritual meaning of the stone, the healing qualities of the stone. We are very familiar with the chakra energy centers and the vibration that occurs in each of them, and the color that's associated with each one of them. So stones also click into that system. And yeah, I'm still learning, and there are people more astute and more wise than me to put the combinations together. So a lot of it just has to do with personal feeling. And again, that's okay. Everybody is allowed to be where they're at with it. So
absolutely. Love that. Thank you. I'm so glad I asked. And it seems like the whole intention behind you making the jewelry is to help raise the vibration, whether it be to help people get through something or to make them feel a certain way. It seems like it's all a very elevating energy.
For sure, it is. It's like I said, there's a spell with each one. So I handwrite. I do the research, and I'm like thinking into what's the right combination, and then there's a process I go through in terms of like, okay, how am I going to impart that combination of what they share with me, what I felt into, why did I make the choices of the materials that I did, and my hope for them. So I put that down in a handwritten note. I mean, we rarely get handwritten anything these days, so it's a nice process that way too.
Oh, so sweet. And where can people find your jewelry?
Well, as you mentioned, it's smattered across my IG feed at Stephen.Fielding. And then the company name is Stone Witch Talisman. So stonewitchtalisman.com. And then we have an IG feed on that, which is just Stone Witch Talisman, all one word, and then underscore at the end.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I just wanted, just in case people were all excited about the jewelry, I want them to know where they can get it. And of course I will link it in the description. So it's really easy. Right. So I guess this kind of goes into, we were talking about the new earth, and I don't know if you've ever read the book by Eckhart. I watched the interview series that him and Oprah did a while ago. It was like one of the first things, like along the very beginning of my like awakening journey, I listened to that. And you talked about creativity and collaboration. And for me, that's what I hear when I hear you speak about the jewelry, is lots of creativity and even collaboration between you and nature. So I guess the new earth, whatever thoughts you have around that, I'd love to hear.
Yeah, in our prior conversation, what I found, and this actually comes from work when I was even at Microsoft, working with the small business entrepreneurial team, where I had the privilege of meeting many, many, many entrepreneurs, and just I think that is such a beautiful path to follow in terms of one's own growth, because it does require of you to be creative and collaborative and cooperative and communicate well. And but in the context of the new earth, I think that's in terms of value systems shifting. That's where I get really sort of excited about where things could possibly go in terms of, and I mentioned also offline, which was recalibrating, reorienting my relationship with money as more of an energetic flow. It's a tool to acknowledge contribution to each other, and that, you know, we show up in ways that when we're aligned and we're resonant with our true essence, that's of value, you know, of to everybody that we come in contact with. And we just have to find the right, you know, matching piece of the puzzle to have co-resonance, and then really fun things start to happen when you're both sort of aligned and in flow to a greater goal. So when you look at things like the farm that is coming together down in Lockhart, Texas, that Aubrey Marcus has literally sort of put a stake in the ground and saying, this is where we're going to, you know, cultivate this kind of way of being in terms of creating that more beautiful world our hearts knew or know, as we've heard in the past year or two. And well, what does that look like? Well, it means, like, you know, you show up and you just contribute because that feels like what you're called to do in that moment. There's no expectation on the other side that, you know, having a belief that in other ways things will come back to you if you make an offer of yourself and be of service. And it's where expectations and judgments of not having those expectations met, and that whole, you know, cycle of energy, which doesn't allow for that contribution to each other to happen naturally. So that's where I get excited, is where people sort of step to the front and say, hey, this is what I'm about. Anybody want to partner up and do something fun together? And it'll resonate with folks, and there'll be monetary exchange down the road, but we're not sort of starting from that. You know, we're not starting from a profit and loss, you know, table. We're starting from what's the contribution, what's the in-service component to it. So I'll leave it like that. Does that sort of give you a flavor, a smattering of New Earth thoughts?
Yeah, it does. I love it because it's kind of the way that I believe. So when I think about the law of compensation and the law of the universe, basically you get back what you put out, and it doesn't always have to be in monetary gain, but just knowing that you'll be taken care of. So for me, I give some stuff away for free, probably more than like my business coach would ever want me to tell her. But I just know and believe that I will be taken care of when the time is right and when it's going to come back around. And I just believe that. So I'm really happy to hear and think about the energy that's going to be there at that Lockhart place, like with people just volunteering their time and like trusting that it's going to come back, and creating and digging on the land with that beautiful intention of like volunteer and just wanting to help build this beautiful place. It's just being built with such great intention, such purity, that I can't wait to see the finished product and feel the grounds there. I think it's going to be otherworldly. And it just gives me hope, because that's the way that I think as well in my business. And I just know that it's going to come back. And that's where that like trust is. And also, you mentioned expectations. I think a lot of people, and this actually has come up a couple, like even in a conversation earlier today, and in this, I'm studying the Bhagavad Gita right now, and it's all about acting without being concerned about the fruits of your labor. It's acting for the sake of acting, being in the flow state, being totally present with whatever you're doing, and just knowing that it's going to end up okay. And I've been having the conversation about flow state, and being totally in flow and being totally present is like where all the power is. That's where the whole universe is in the moment. But if we're worried about expectations and what's going to come out of it, then part of our energy is already in the future and we're not totally fully present. And I feel like when we're working in the present is when the best fruits come, when we are able to focus all our energy in the here and now. So that just kind of like popped off a couple things for me with the expectations and the fruits and the collaboration. And so thank you for that. That just ignited some excitement.
I couldn't tell.
Yeah, right. Oh my gosh. And money beliefs too. That's huge. I'm going through my own money, but my whole life I've been told you don't have a concept of money. Money burns a hole in your pocket. Don't give Dani money because of whatever. And usually I get in trouble because I spend it on other people. It's not usually for it's like if somebody has a birthday, I'm like, oh, here we go. And so
Yeah.
that's usually where I get myself into a little bit of trouble. But even getting out of those thought patterns and like thinking like, no, I know what to do with money. Like I have a business and like this is, so I've been really trying to tease out those old paradigms to come into a new money belief where it is an exchange of energy. And I'm so happy that you said that. I worked with Money Magic. One of my friends does this cool thing. And I saw money for the first time in my life as this beautiful, sparkling green stream of energy. And it wasn't dollar bills. It wasn't like this negative, evil thing, which is kind of how I used to think about it. It was this beautiful, playful, green, sparkling energy. And it would like pop up over here and pop up over here. And it was just really playful. And it was so nice because I used to think about money as like a very evil kind of thing. I don't know where that got taught to me, but it's finally unraveling and I'm happy about it. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean the parts that are feel like they're shifting in terms of there's more than enough money in the world, you know, to service everybody, and that the issue, not necessarily the issue, but the key into the lock is, well, how do you craft something that you know, tunes into the resonance right now, what's of need right now. And I think, you know, a lot of folks are looking for, you know, I mean, coming out of 2 years of ins and outs of lockdowns and being separate, you know, from each other, that we're trying to recalibrate our, you know, just even connecting on a facial level. You know, I have a friend, you know, a friend of Deb's is a kindergarten teacher, and she's got, you know, 5-year-olds who've been in, you know, at home for the better part of 2 years behind a mask. So from 3 years old, and now they're in these classrooms and they're fucking traumatized. So she feels them. She feels them, you know, and trying to figure it out and trying to be in connection with each other and trying to be with each other. And so, you know, as yeah, so as you know, as adults, we've, you know, had more experience. We have, you know, coping mechanisms, you know, that are good, bad, and different, you know, various different flavors.
Yeah.
But the real need is for us to not necessarily lead from a place of like making money off of each other, you know. And it's okay, how can we easily and gracefully walk each other home, you know, and just be more of service to each other.
You just mentioned a Ram Dass quote about walking each other home.
Mm-hmm.
That is like my man. I love him. Actually, this mala I got from him, his not him personally, but his like Love Serve Remember shop or something. And this podcast is called Talking Each Other Home for that very reason, because I love him so much. So I guess actually in that vein, now that we're on the topic, the word home, what comes up? What is home to you?
Oh, interesting topic. What is home to me? I mean, that goes back to, I mean, home is just so many different things. You know, it's where one feels that you can authentically sort of let your guard down, you know. And I'd go back to childhood, you know. It was my grandmother's apartment in London, you know, and it was a beautiful Victorian, you know, 3-story house with the garden level flat, and she had it beautifully decorated, and there were these big, you know, velvet curtains and whatnot. I used to wrap myself up in the velvet curtains playing hide and seek, or I'd build, you know, forts out of the cushions on the couches. And so it's kind of places like that. I mean, as where you felt, you know, one of the funny stories from my childhood was that my grandfather, he was pretty permissive. He's like, yeah, here's some hammer and nails and whatnot. I don't know how old I was, maybe 5 or 6, something like this, 4 or 5. And then in the living room, they heard this hammering going on, and they were like, "Where's Stephen?" And I was behind the couch hammering down the Persian rug to the marquee floor, you know. And it was, and that I gained my nickname, Mr. Fix It, from that. So it's like where you feel comfortable just to do what the fuck you want, So Barbados feels like home. The east coast of Barbados, in Bashaba, which is very rough and just miles of coastline just to walk the beach, and where you can just sort of relax and be in nature. I feel at home with my boys, out on an adventure. I feel at home on my motorcycle running the back roads with Deb behind me. We're just, we're in flow, just going through the back roads at 60, 70 miles an hour. That's always beautiful. So home feels like when I'm in flow. And so when the clock disappears, the concept of time dissolves, and photography was another, medium that I dabbled in for many, many years. I'm passionate about photography and did grand landscapes and would take myself out to Death Valley and do 6 days in the Death Valley and scout areas and da. So being in flow, creating, that feels like home. Yeah. So I make
a good answer.
Yeah. So my mom passed down to me. One of the funny things that she would do would be, I'd roll in freshman year at college, and she'd be the mom, setting up the room and she had to get all the things and the supplies and that. So that kind of need to have my personal space, organized and like set and setting is really important to me. So that home is wherever you make it, and having a few special things around you, and as you can see, I love art and talking about energy flow and whatnot. If I feel resonance with the artist, I need a piece of their energy in my collection. And Deb's like, "You have so much art." I'm like, "And?" So makes you feel good. So yeah.
It seems like we both have a bit of a spirit space going on. This is my spirit space. That's what I call it. And I have like little gifts from everybody all around me, like from the people that I coach and just from over the years. And like, even what I wear is usually gifts from people. It just starts to become a part of me. And I love this flower of life. Purple's like my color right now. I almost had the lights purple, but it looked weird in here. Where did you get that? Did you make that? Like, the thing's awesome.
I did not make it. I found an artist on IG, of all places. Find everybody on IG these days. And he was doing, I think he's taken a bit of a hiatus from producing pieces. I think he went through a life moment and transition. He used to live in Miami. I think he moved back to New York, which is where he was from. But he would do flower of life designs. I gave him the fit for service Bodhisattva graphic, and he created one out of that, which sits over my altar in another room. So it's a big 3-foot piece and lights up too. And he does various different, he does Hamsa hands, and he does all sorts of Egyptian themed cutouts. And yeah, he did a lion's head and an amazing piece. And then he does things like Buddhas with lotus designs, and it's just I just really resonated with what he was up to. And again, my experience being at Microsoft on the entrepreneur team, small business entrepreneurs, I love them and want to do what I can to help them. So I was like making sure that he got word of mouth into fit for service, and a few folks picked up some things from him from there, and just like being that conduit is really, that's another thing that I love being for people, is a conduit into my network and helping generate that collaborative experience for folks.
Same. I share the same love for being a conduit. I love it. Like I'm taking people from fit for service and I'm bringing them into conscious champion. So we've been doing these like the breath work with Autumn and things like that. So it's been really cool. And I also very much enjoy connecting the two worlds and helping with that connection. And I love your spirit space. I just have to say, and then you have an altar. So I guess just to kind of to
Oh
maybe say
yeah,
the last
there's
thing.
a little bit more view of this space. That's
Okay.
my dad's desk from his prep school days. So that's where I journal. That piece of
Mhm.
art over my shoulder is from Matt Quick. That photograph is one of the pictures I took down in Death Valley.
Wow.
And yeah, I got this picture of Kathy Ireland that was taken by my friend Dixie Dixon, which helped support a nonprofit project she was involved with. So yeah, it's I love it.
Awesome. And I guess last thing is like, let's bring it home with allowing yourself. Let's just talk just briefly more about what that, I know we did a little bit at the beginning, but that concept is just so beautiful and something that I'm stepping into. I think I was afraid of myself for a while, and I'm not really sure why or if that even makes sense. But how could we allow ourselves more of ourself?
It's it's a wow. I mean, there's a lot to that question. I don't think you really know yourself truly until you place yourself in some pretty challenging situations. So how can you get to know yourself in those spaces, right? So by all measurement, we live a pretty cush, comfortable life. Um,
Yeah.
Compared to the other 9 billion souls on this planet. Um, if you're watching this video, if you're watching this podcast, you are probably in the top 2% of the population on this planet, and probably higher than that. So we live a very privileged life. And um, we've lost our ways in terms of rites of passage and initiatory experiences.
Okay.
So there's a huge or a significant gap in our human experience in terms of how we know ourselves authentically in that moment in times of challenge and adversity. And if you think back into the 20th century and the qualities that came out of periods of adversity, you know, my personal experience, my heritage goes back to, um, you know, the czars running ethnic cleansing through villages in Western Ukraine. So all the conflict that's happening in the Ukraine right now is very so it's activated some genetic, you know, level reminiscence around what happened to my ancestors in their little village back in the earliest 20th part of the 20th century. So you think about adversity. My father was born in 1940. You know, Second World War and the bombings of London were still happening. So his formative years, you know, air raid sirens are part of his genetic, you know, makeup. Um, my grandmother, you know, she lived through. She was born, I think, just after World War One, and or just before World War One. But you think about worldwide conflicts have been moments of adversity where men have and women have been challenged. But now we're at this point where we can return back to more positive, healthy rites of passage and initiatory experiences, whether they're sort of in ceremony, and that's code for you know, various different plant medicine experiences, or you know, the full temple reset that Fit for Service has been doing, which I wanted to be part of and would like to do, you know, and that's, you know, a 5-day fast with, you know, hot and cold therapy in terms of sauna and cold plunge, really monitoring, you know, meditative practices. So placing yourself, you know, vision quests, you know, putting your hands in good hands with somebody who's versed in vision quest experiences, or Delaney just dropped into, and Aubrey Marcus did a documentary about his experience of 7 days in the dark, a dark experience. So darkness meditation too, or vipassana, putting yourself in those adverse, positive, experiences where you can get to know yourself, like how you show up in those edges of experience. That's where I feel like you should make a lot of notes in your notebook and journal, like how you're feeling in those moments, and then bring back that knowledge. And it goes to, and it kind of goes to why I have the tattoo on my right forearm. It's going to be upside down and back to front, but this one right in here is based on a symbol out of the Adinkra tribe called Sankofa. So this pattern right here on both sides is called Sankofa. And Sankofa means to go back and fetch it. So if you're not exploring your history, your upbringing, your patterns that were laid down, your the internal dialogue and the scripts that you're running inside unconsciously because they were laid down so early in your life. If you're not excavating that and getting to know that part of yourself, it's really hard to be yourself. But allowing yourself the process to explore that, and not, trying to circumnavigate that and say, oh, I got everything figured out and I'm good. I think the more people do that, the more we will be in a better place to face the challenges ahead. So yeah, it's one of the more interesting. My mom had a lot of medical issues over her life, and my dad, being a physician, kept lots of notes, because he would have to hand off her medical file, which was an inch thick, to each new physician that they would build a relationship with, to deal with some of the physical things that were going on with her. But I was reading her medical history and the postpartum depression that she had after my birth. I feel like, okay, maybe I was left alone to figure out my emotional needs at that time. And so I'm still like trying to process and feel into, am I feeling that effect now, 50 plus years on? And how do I want to show up for myself? How do I love my infant self now? How do I meet that human's needs in this moment? So it's an ongoing learning experience. And but allowing yourself is that whole process. It's being curious and being willing to take on adverse circumstances, so you can have a real clear sense of what that means.
I love both of those concepts. So what I heard was go back and fetch it, go back and figure out where you came from, why you are the way you are, into your childhood, and even beyond that, ancestry, lineage, stuff like that, to understand who you are today as yourself. And how people always say, getting comfortable in the uncomfortable. And putting ourselves, even in a cold plunge, you learn something new about yourself. Even going through breath work, so it's like going through those things that are positively uncomfortable, so that you could uncover more of yourself and live more fully from that place. So I really love those two things that you said, because that's something that's very present in my life right now, is kind of going into inner child stuff, and also putting myself in uncomfortable situations, being a business owner and like doing new things and continuously stepping up. Yeah, I feel very much so both of those things. So I'm so happy that you spoke about those. Yeah.
You're welcome. Yeah.
Okay. So last thing is, where can people find you?
Well, IG is the easiest, at Stephen.Fielding on IG, and the other two handles are connected to Stonewitch Talisman. So the at Stonewitch Talisman _ is also an IG handle, and then stonewitchtalisman.com is the website. But my personal IG is probably the easiest, and I'm also on WhatsApp. If you want to WhatsApp, Signal, Telegram, but we'll start with IG and go from there.
Okay, good. And I'll make sure to put that link in the description too.
Yeah.
And to close this out, what do you hope to see in the world?
What do I hope to see in the world? Hmm. Well, it kind of goes back to the flower of life, right? So the interconnectedness of and yeah, I mean the unicity of everything. If you really we have a perspective as an individual human to look at everything else as other, but when you get down to it, we are all part of a big pattern, and that at the end of the day, we don't have a whole lot of difference between us. So, what are we jumping into conflict about is really something that needs to be explored. Does conflict really have a place in the world that we want to create?
Mm.
Or better dialogue and acknowledging that we have more related to each other than different.
So oneness and unity, like the flower of life. Oh, I love it. Stephen, thank you. This has been an amazing conversation. I feel like I could just keep asking questions and questions and questions. You're very interesting.
Likewise. Likewise. Well, hopefully this will continue this conversation down the road, and we'll stay connected. I looked where you're located, and you're not too far from where I went to school. I went to the University of Rhode Island. And I lived in Boston for many years. My sister used to dance for the Boston Ballet. So Cape Cod and your neck of the woods. I was aiming to get to Woods Hole, as an oceanographer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Cool. So you know where I am, and you're located like almost opposite end of the US from me now, right?
at the moment, yes, I've been in the Seattle area for a better part of 20 years now. So it's I think it's 20 years next year. It's actually the longest place I've lived. As I mentioned, London, and then the East Coast and Connecticut, and in DC and Boston and San Francisco, and now Seattle.
Wow. That's a place that me and my husband definitely want to come visit. It's on our list. I really would love to see the Pacific Northwest and just explore and see the trees. I hear the trees are amazing, and I'm such a tree person freak. So I really want to feel the trees and hang out with the giants over there.
Well, we have some beautiful specimens of Doug fir on our property. These huge, 300-year-old trees. They're pretty amazing. Yeah. Open invitation anytime.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I'll
Yeah.
let you know. All right. Well, thank you again, Stephen. This has been lovely. And everybody, as always, thank you so much for watching and for joining us for another episode. I can't wait to see you on the next one. Peace.